Welcome to Future 39, the podcast where every episode we'll take a shared peek at one of the infinite possible futures that await. My name is John Koetsier. I write for Forbes, consult with tech companies, and I'm writing Insights from the Future, a book of future news. We are perhaps the first culture defined by the future. Awe of the future, fear of the future, desire for the future. We can't stop thinking about the future. It's exploding into our lives every day in new technology, new wonders, and new horrors. Name an area: climate, politics, war, food, culture, art, sports, biology, anything. Technology is reinventing our world. This is F39, number one. I'm going to introduce our guest today. Our guest is a futurist, and he's a speaker from Vancouver, Canada. He runs the Exponential Minds podcast. He was programming and hacking computer games at 10. He has a degree in psychology and computer science, a single combined degree. Very interesting. He's hosted conferences like Cyborg Camp, From Now, Future Camp, and Dark Futures. He's written for everything from the BBC to TechCrunch, and he's spoken to more than 200,000 people at more than 300 events. Nikolas Badminton, thank you for being our guest.
Hi, John. How are you?
Doing really, really well.
Cool.
Doing better now that I'm chatting with you. We go back a ways, actually. We've known each other for about a decade.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was working over at DDB, and you were working at a company, and you're actually my client. And then that company disappeared.
Yes, it did.
That company disappeared, and then it was around about 8 years ago. I started really leaning into talking about design and futures and human-computer interaction, and tapping into sort of the subculture of biohacking and all these things. And back then, people were kind of thinking we were all a bit strange to be so excited about these areas. And today, it's like a completely viable business.
It's wonderful. And You're doing amazing. And one of the big projects that you have recently I want to dive into is in and around biohacking and smart drugs, nootropics. I don't know, you must have seen it as well, the Limitless movie with Bradley Cooper.
Yeah.
And that doc is now on Amazon Prime. I think you mentioned iTunes, Google Play. Talk to me about the project you did and how you got into that.
Yeah. So around about, it was, what was it? Like 2 years ago, I was approached through some friends. It came at me through two angles. One was through an agent I was working with. Another was through an online tech publication called BetaKit. And it was like these documentary producers were looking for a biohacker in Canada that was willing to experiment. And everyone was saying, go and chat to Nick Badminton. So I ended up chatting to a producer called Anne Shin, and she's an award-winning documentary producer, and she's a fabulous individual. They said, we've got this documentary, we want to do on smart drugs. We want to work with someone that knows the area around transhumanism and whatever to help us, one, shape the documentary, two, to take part in the documentary, to host it, to try out the different things that we find. So that's what we did. So I sat down and I worked with the producers and directors. We worked out who we were going to talk to, what was important, what wasn't important. And then we got on a plane, went to San Francisco and a bunch of other places and met the people doing it. And I tried a whole bunch of different things to help really hack my productivity.
Did you have to insert anything under your skin, anything metallic, anything with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth technology?
No, I did that on my own a few years before at one of my conferences From Now. A guy called Emil Grafstra put an RFID chip under my skin. He runs a company called DangerousThings.com, and he's been working in implantables for a while. Anyway, this was very much about the things that you can ingest or the things you can do to your body. Everything from nootropics, the supplements that give you more focus and attention and stamina in certain cases, all the way through to like Wim Hof method therapy, breathing, cold water therapy, through to oxygen, sitting in hyperbaric chambers.
Yes.
to oxygenate the blood, to doing whatever. And I've gone even further now. I've done really deep breath work, and I do a therapy called psychological kinesiology now, which is about belief systems. And yeah, it's been fascinating.
Well, it's super interesting. I got a confession to make. I got contacted by a company in SF that was doing nootropics, and they sent me a sample, and I had the sample. I agreed to do the sample, and I chickened out. I thought, what is in this? I have no clue. This is not FDA approved. This is who knows what's in this thing. So you took a bunch of drugs. Talk to us a little bit about what those drugs were
Yeah.
and what they did for you.
Yeah, I mean, FDA approved and all these things. I was trying. I tried like hooky Indian modafinil off of the black market, things like that. I was really willing to like push the boundaries. So modafinil was one. Obviously that's a prescription drug. I was given some that wasn't my prescription. Probably the best for focus, and a lot of entrepreneurs have told me that it's amazing for focus in sitting down, writing strategy, doing long stretches of development and whatever. And then I tried a number of other nootropics as well, like piracetam, phenylpiracetam. And the phenylpiracetam was actually originally developed in Russia and used on the space program by cosmonauts. And it just gave more focused attention, sort of oxygenated their brain. And that was really rock and roll. I really loved that. I'd played around with some nootropics before, like Alpha Brain and whatever, a few years before, and it just kind of gives you really funky nightmares.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, so it's not great to take a lot of this, but I really stepped forward and tried out a whole bunch of different things, and I ended up being able to get more done in my days. And is it fundamentally changed my life? I don't think so. But has it shown me that the balance can be achieved by using supplements? Absolutely, it has. So I still sort of delve into it once in a while.
So that's interesting. I mean, I want to know when the drug comes out that makes me Bradley Cooper, right? That I can
Yeah,
have focus and I can, expand my mind. That'd be amazing. So you don't use them regularly anymore, but you
no,
do some other things that you learned, some
yeah.
physical, mental things.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was just really something that sort of kickstart a whole sort of renaissance with me of looking at how things can change. And I'd sort of looked at a bunch of different areas before, and as I stepped into this wider world, I started to think, okay, if there's some opportunities to use, natural remedies, because all these smart drugs are natural. Modafinil is not; it's a pharmaceutical. But if you can use things like piracetam or whatever, and you can use various CoQ10 and various other sort of over the counter supplements to help really hack how your body works, and even using like food as well and exercise, then this is something that we need to unlock. And I really struggle with a whole bunch of things like good nutrition and good fitness and whatever, because I spend so much time on airplanes and in hotels and speaking on stage and whatever. But I have to have a balance. So
Yes.
I don't necessarily get have a raft of tablets I take everywhere. For example, phenylpiracetam is banned in the UK. It's actually a banned substance by the Olympics, right?
Oh,
So I can't go flying into the UK with one of these things. So you have to still be quite careful because there's a lot of considerations country by country.
yes.
But yeah, it's I lean on a bunch of different things now to help me really manage how life is. It's sort of I'm on sort of version 2.0 of everything. Really.
Let's jump to the future of food because it's a related topic and it's something that you're working
Sure.
on
Yeah,
recently as well,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
And there's so many changes coming on with food. We see the Impossible Burger. We see meat that
yeah,
isn't meat, right? We see differences in how we're producing food with vertical farms that you've got 1 acre and it produces as much as maybe a 10-acre traditional farm or even more. And you see how important that is as we
yeah.
lose land, arable land, right? Talk to me a little bit about what you're working on there, what you're seeing there.
Yeah, so I've worked with so I grew up in a farming community. So I grew up in a 5,000 person village in the southwest of England in Somerset, and we had a slaughterhouse in the centre of the village, and we were surrounded by dairy farms. When I left school, I didn't have much in terms of qualifications, I was good at computers, but I didn't get a chance to sit any of those exams because the educational system's broken. And, and so I ended up working in dairy farms and whatever, then went back to university, back into computers, AI and the such like.
I
But like,
never would have picked you for a farmer boy. That is amazing. This is
yeah,
insight.
I know. Yeah, no, absolutely. But like, yeah, I grew up in a community. I worked in a dairy. I used to deliver milk around the village, and
You were a milkman.
I was
Awesome.
a I was a milkman. I was a milkman for a number of years after university, and after school,
Yes.
before college and university. But now over the last 4 or 5 years, since I've been doing way more sort of public speaking, it's a lot of it's been with farmers, and it's been with people that work in the agriculture industry. And I've worked with everyone from like Dow Agricultural, Dow Pharmaceuticals, all the way through to Real Agriculture, which is an online sort of news platform, all the way through to, I worked with Bayer at their agriculture event earlier this year. And do you know what? If you really want to understand the fundamentals of delivering food, speak to farmers. They're hugely technological.
Yes.
They've always been really advanced. The technology world has been hugely skeptical of that. At the beginning, even people like Bill Gates said, I can't imagine how any farmer would need a personal computer at home. Meanwhile, we're now in a world where farmers can utilize artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, big data, drones, satellite technology. And I had a 70-year-old couple that still worked on their farm, obviously with their kids. And the woman got out her smartphone, and she was showing me how she opened and closed the vents on her grain bins.
Wonderful.
And this is it. This is to me a sort of a revolution. Farmers actually find a practical application in technology. They're not going to say, yeah, we're going to buy this, we're going to buy that, we're going to buy this, and suddenly our world's going to be better. Like many big companies can just buy software
Yes.
in that way. For farmers, it's like, if I'm going to spend $200,000 on this particular thing, say it's a sensor, that's going to deliver more than $200,000 worth of value in the next 2 to 3 years, right? Ideally in the first year. So farmers are very practical about this, and food supply is going to be hugely important. By 2050, there's going to be more than 9 billion people on the planet, and the UN thinks that we're going to need about 60% more food grown. So food yields, new ways of producing food, vertical farming in cities to reduce the amount of distance that food has to travel. All sorts of areas are really being invested in. And, you do have the funky things like robotics and AI and whatever, but it does also go back to chemicals and also new ways of actually growing food where you don't need to rely on fungicides and herbicides, pesticides, much water, because water is going to be in limited supply going forward, right?
It's super, super interesting. I was just in Bermuda, and there's kind of a preview of the future of food there in some sense from a consumer point of view, because it's a tiny island, 65,000 people, tiny island. You see the farms there, and it looks like somebody's backyard. It's that small.
Yeah.
And I did not see any vertical farms there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge opportunity for island nations like that. But I also, when I went to the supermarket, and a cauliflower is $5, right? A cucumber is $3 or something like that, right? And it's super expensive. But if we can implement some of these new technologies, some of these ways of growing food smarter, faster, or just more intensive on the same amount of land, that's huge for those places. But that also speaks to where cities might need to go in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just in Grand Cayman last year, and they pretty much they don't grow their own food. They've got some sort of smaller farms, just like you say, like people's backyards. I'm not sure if Bermuda's the same, but you've got places like Grand Cayman that's got a huge amount of agricultural potential. But because the modern world, they fly everything in from Miami. That's why it's like $5 for a cucumber. And it's kind of backwards. I mean, we've kind of got it wrong. The modern food supply system of scale, grow food at scale and distribute supply chain, it's kind of gone wrong because there's been lots of sort of shaking hands and deals made to distribute food. I mean, I was in the supermarket just yesterday, and there's garlic from China and there's garlic from Ontario.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I'm going to buy the garlic from Ontario even though it's more expensive. And it's like, You mean to tell me that that garlic has traveled all the way from China to the supermarket? To me, that fundamentally means that there's a problem with how we're growing and sharing food. I mean, who knows how old that garlic is? I mean, the average age of an apple, I think I saw a stat, the average age of an apple on the shelf in the supermarket is like, what, 9 months? Maybe even more than that?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I actually think that there's a huge potential to sort of bring it closer to home, to grow the food that we need. And this is why things like cellular meat and plant-based diets and whatever are starting to gain a lot more sort of credence in the conversations happening in the world. Because it just reduces that supply chain between the producer and the end consumer. Right?
Well, what's super interesting to me is that with these new technologies and more intensive agriculture on limited spaces, we can reinvent what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we see in cities that the architecture is growing towards more of a live work type of scenario. We see some innovations there. What if in the future we looked at cities and we said, hey, the architecture we're going to build spaces for people to live,
Yeah.
spaces for people to work. You know what? We're going to build spaces for greenery right into that. And the farm is all around us.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be amazing for sustainability, for the environment, for how we would feel emotionally about the places that we live in? There's such huge potential there, just like in energy production, which is going to get decentralized.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I look out from my apartment, I'm in Toronto at the moment, and I look out over when it's not snowing. You've got rooftops. You've got rooftops
Yes.
that you can literally grow food. I've got a friend Arlene who runs the rooftop farm at Ryerson. She's got a doctorate in agriculture, I think, and food production. And so she's looking at how you can use these spaces in new ways. And I completely agree. We've dehumanized the city. It's literally places that it's easy to get from A to B in a vehicle, rather than actually having a good human experience on the streets. These rooftops are just one step in the right direction of being able to grow food. But it's still like a very small amount of rooftops in Toronto, probably only about 2 in the whole of Toronto has actually got that kind of thing going on. And even though it's quite sensible, and it's because, we've sort of forgotten the importance of growing our own food, and we don't reward the people that do, right?
Right, right. It's almost like we planned this. We didn't actually, but there's a great segue here because we wanted to talk a little bit about climate change as
Yeah.
well. And climate change is probably one of the bigger, if not the biggest, challenges facing us right now. And yet, technology, which has in a very large sense caused this problem, enabled us to grow to staggering numbers, enabled us to pump huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Technology also promises potentially the ability to slow it down, maybe even reverse it. Talk a little bit about some of the things you're seeing
Yeah,
there.
I mean, we're actually in this situation where we're never going to be able to reverse it. We're never going to get cooler as a planet, and that's sort of there are a lot of people that say, "Oh, we can do geoengineering and we can bring CO2 out of the atmosphere, and that would be great." That's not going to happen on a scale that's going to be actually useful for reducing climate. It's going to be part and parcel of the solution, and overall, everything from like planting trees to geoengineering to sustainable practices, running businesses and transportation is going to lead to a future that's a little bit more stable versus getting warmer and warmer and warmer and causing all sorts of catastrophes like the Arctic ice melting and never coming back, or tundra fires and whatever. But over the last 250 years, the industrial revolutions that have shaped our modern world, right, have been shaped through communication,
Yes.
energy, and transportation, and all of that was enabled by fossil fuels, right? The early days of driving cars, the best early cars were electric. Their battery technology was just terrible.
Right.
And then you had the oligarchs coming in and saying, actually, we've got an abundance of oil and we're going to use combustion engines. And everyone's like, oh no, that's absolutely fine. Now we're in today where you've got 100 of the world's largest companies make their money by pumping oil, like getting gas out of the ground or whatever, and distributing that. And they're causing a huge amount of trouble in industry. And because we're still burning it for industrial transportation, like shipping and flying, for personal transportation, whatever. and big changes haven't happened, and they're not happening yet, not that I can see. I call 2020 the year of resiliency, because we need to work out how we're going to survive a world where we're going to be warmer, where there is going to be more adverse weather conditions, where our children might have higher instances of asthma and eczema and all sorts of things that can be caused by lower quality of air. I mean, if you look at the pictures, I think it's Delhi right now,
Yes.
just choked.
Horrific.
Absolutely choked.
Horrific.
I mean, back in the 1950s, there was also London that was choked by the similar sort of thing for 4 days, and something like 50 plus people died there. In India, hundreds and maybe thousands of people are dying because we've absolutely choked the earth. The inconvenient truth is that the earth is becoming an inhospitable place to live. And as things get warmer, you're going to say goodbye to places like potentially like Grand Cayman and Bermuda, because the water is going to be
Yes.
rising. Places like Bangladesh just aren't going to exist in 100 years' time if we don't start taking some action today. Right?
Yes. 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 Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing. You're working with some of the largest investment firms in the
Yeah.
world, luxury brands, advertising. What are you telling these people? What are you giving these people? What are you helping these companies
Yeah,
with?
so over the past few years, I've sort of taken. I spent the majority of my career working in technology strategy and then business strategy. So I've sort of beefed that up, and now with what I've been doing in terms of looking out 5, 10, 20 years, is I've developed a lot of foresight practices, and I've got an associate consultancy. So I've got a bunch of people that I talk to, everyone from experts in cybercrime to impact to other futurists as well that specialize in certain areas. And what we do is typically I get clients coming to me, they're saying, okay, we realize that our quarterly by quarterly view or our 18-month view isn't really delivering enough inspiration into our organization to get people to care about what the future is going to be. And typically it starts with organizations wanting to ignite their own employees, but it typically ends with an idea of creating foresight programs. Very much like innovation was touted as something being important in an organization, foresight is being touted as well. Now innovation practices have been established and innovation mindset has been put in place. The same thing's happening with foresight. So being able to help people look into the future and forecast, based on a product or based on a consumer change and whatever, what the world will be like in 5, 10, 20 years, helps them work out how they can create a resilient business.
This is amazing. I mean, it's really amazing because we're not far from a time. In fact, we're still in a time where most companies are quarterly
That's
focused. What's happening next quarter? Are we meeting the numbers this quarter? Are we set up well for next quarter? And a climate change world and a rapidly evolving technological world isn't one where you can just look at the next quarter. You've got to look a few years out. You've got to look a decade out. You've got to see how are we going to be relevant in a world that is fundamentally changing. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, and we have to listen to the warnings that are coming. About a month and a half ago, over 130 banks at the United Nations in New York City came together, and these are banks that have got assets under management of around about $47 trillion, trillion with a T.
So they're the small banks
This
of the
is
world.
like these are the people that are like controlling the flow of what's happening globally in everything from trade to GDP or whatever. And they're saying we know that the climate warming is going to be bad for business. And by the way, if you're in our portfolio, and many of the fossil fuel companies are, it's like we're going to divest away from you. Norway's taking brave steps towards that. New York City investment funds are taking brave steps away from that as well. So that was one warning. Another warning that came in was Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, turned around and said, if you work in a business and you do not take sustainability seriously, you do not take the effects of climate change seriously, and you do not change, you will become obsolete and ultimately bankrupt as a business. So when you start to hear these players coming in and giving these warnings, you've got CEOs starting to pay a lot of attention. And every single one of my keynotes, I start with this. I was in Halifax last week to a small group of private companies and doing it with a consultancy partner of mine. And I've been to, 300-400 person conferences, and I start with, we have to take this seriously. And 4 years ago, people were literally laughing at me. And even at the beginning of this year, I did a private group. I can't say too much about it because it's under Chatham House rules. But it was a private group, and I was talking seriously about electricity supply and sustainability, the fact that we have to move to renewables, and how the end is nigh for fossil fuels. And there was a table of people that were from a certain part of North America that will remain unnamed,
It's a large
laughing
part.
at me, just literally laughing at the
Wow.
back in the background. And it's like, there are some people that have literally got their heads in the sand and think this isn't a
Yes.
problem. And fundamentally, these are the people that will be out of jobs. And I don't know why people deny information and science, and why they're perpetuating ideas. I spoke at a conference full of oil and gas workers just 2 months ago, and they're a large union, oil and gas workers, and the deputy secretary stood up and said, "Yeah, we want to get out of fossil fuels. We want to see these companies step up and be part of, a solution towards resiliency. We want them to step into renewables, and we want them to hire us." And I gave my presentation, and I was quite worried because it's like, oh, there's these people that rely on oil and gas for their salary, for their jobs, for
Yes.
their livelihood, to send their kids to school. And at the end, they,
Yes.
they stood up and gave me a round of applause. And I was like, this is wild. And it's because it's all making sense to all people today, except for the people in absolute denial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a wonderful thing. And I mean, we all, those of us in the world of technology and who keep up with the news know that, for instance, there's more people employed in the solar industry than in the coal industry in the US. And I know that's the unnamed nations. I'm thinking that's the unnamed nations. You do not need to confirm or deny
Yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, China. Look to China for where the big changes are happening. Um, Yeah, yeah.
Huge.
Typically, they would generate electricity from coal. They're now shutting down tons of, pardon the pun, tons of coal factories. They're shutting down. They're now opening
Yes.
huge amounts of solar generation ability through wind and through solar in both China and Mongolia. And they're starting to look at initiatives like the Asian supergrid to connect up like Russia and Korea, Japan, Taiwan, to unlimited, cheap electricity generated by wind and solar. And they're now deploying the full infrastructure in their cities. They're deploying about 6,000 electric buses every 5 or 6 weeks in their cities to replace all of the internal combustion engine vehicles that are there. This is
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's amazing they can do it because there's one guy in charge of the country that says do it, and everyone does it, right? And
Yes.
fundamentally, they're the people that are going to really own the new world infrastructure. North America is actually in a risk position where they could be potentially annexed out of a global energy, renewable energies grid. But yeah, that's a few years away. But
Yes.
I'm very much an advocate for stepping up and thinking about renewable energy. I talk about it again in every presentation, to farmers, to big banks, to consumer product companies, and we all have to have a responsibility to do the best for the planet as we go forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Nick, I just want to thank you for spending a half an hour with us. I want to thank you for sharing what you've learned and what you're seeing, and also what you're hearing from your clients, and sharing that with us. I really appreciate
I
your
really
time.
appreciate the conversation, John. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for spending some time with Future39. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do take a moment to go to iTunes, go to podcast, go to Spotify, wherever you pick this podcast up, and give it a like, give it a rating, give it a review, give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.